stuff for theme parks and roads and highways and libraries and all kind of ignorant stuff. Well, they now want a clean CR. That means the money is used only for the things that are essential. Just essential, right? You've only made $1,000 this month. You don't have money to buy a Louis Vuitton bag, okay? You're going to buy groceries, going to keep the lights on and pay the rent. Gas for the car. The essentials. Democrats want a Louis Vuitton bag. And they say, no, this is just for essentials. So, everybody's supposed to vote on it. The Republicans vote for the bill, and the Democrats don't vote for the bill. And then they say that Republicans shut down the government. What do the Democrats want, y'all? They want almost like an extra $1 trillion for Obamacare. Now, people say, well, what's wrong with that, Vince? Let me tell you what's going on here so you'll understand. It is always in the minutia. It's always in the bull crap. The Democrats want money to make sure that illegal immigrants can have access to medical care here in America. That's all it is. I'm going to give you some facts, and I'm going to read them to you. Here's the facts. Democrats' proposal will once again allow those improperly granted asylum and parole under Biden's open border scheme to receive Medicaid. Democrat proposals will require Medicaid to pay more for emergency care provided to illegal aliens than it does for American patients who are disabled, elderly, or children. Let me tell you what's going on here. This is kind of complicated, so kind of stick with me. Okay. Democrats in these blue cities and blue states are bleeding citizens. The Democrats have to keep these citizens so they can keep their congressional numbers, but also they need them for the Electoral College. You got 435 members of the Congress. You got 100 in the Senate. That's 535. You need a majority of that number to win the presidency. So whatever state has the most members of Congress, all of them have two senators. But the congressional numbers are divided based on population. So you have a state like California has a whole lot of congressmen. They have a whole lot of what? Electoral college votes. Because the electoral college votes are counted by the 2 senators you have and the amount of congressmen that you have. So California has a lot of them. Illinois has a lot. New York has a lot. If they lose population, they lose electoral college votes. So when the person runs for presidency, for the president, if they win California, they get all the electoral college votes. California would prefer to keep as many as they can. So they prefer to have 45 as opposed to 40. But if they lose population, Tennessee will get more electoral college votes. South Carolina will get more electoral college votes. Florida will get more. And when these red states go red, they'll be going super red. California, Illinois, New York, they're losing people. And they're losing them because of murder, abortion, prison, and then their taxes are too high, the crime is too high, and the people leave. They got to find a way to get people back to their states. How do they do that? Sanctuary cities. How do sanctuary cities get them to come up? They offer them free stuff. One of the few things they offer them that is free is medical care. Now, you say, what? Illegals can't get Obamacare, and illegals can't get on Medicaid, Medicare. This is what you're missing. The federal government will send a state like California or New York or Illinois money for Medicaid and for Medicare, right? And they tell them, you better not use any of this money for illegal aliens whatsoever. Okay? So what the state will do is they will then take all their Medicaid and Medicare money and use it for citizens. But then they'll take their state money and use it for illegals. They'll also take money that the federal government sends them for emergency room care until all the illegals come to the emergency room for free medical care. So the Republicans are saying you can't use any money, state or federal money, for illegals whatsoever. Emergency rooms, nope. We're not going to give you money to extend emergency room care because you know why? you are going to give that money to illegals. So they said, tell you what you do. Take all of your money. If you got a certain amount of money for emergency room care, we think that you might start using that for American citizens. Blue states said, no, we're still going to use it for illegals. And so if you send us money, we're going to use that money for illegals also. And the feds and the Republicans are saying all of this money should be used for American citizens, period. Or people that we have said you can come to the country, not for illegals. Not for people who've broken into the country and didn't show up for their courtroom hearings. No, only for Americans. And Democrats are saying no. We want to take your federal money, use it for Americans, and take our state money and use it for illegals. That's the problem. Republicans are saying no. You can't use your state money for illegals. And the Democrats said, well, we'll shut the government down unless you allow us to do it. That's it. They're telling you they want subsidies for Obamacare. They need subsidies for Obamacare because they want to use all of their state money to give to illegals. If they were using their state money for Obamacare subsidies for citizens and they weren't giving it to illegals, you wouldn't have this problem. You got it? So they want to use their state money for illegals, federal money for Obamacare, and they're asking the federal government to give them more money for Obamacare because they don't want to use their state money for Obamacare because they want to give that to illegals. That's the whole debate. And the federal government said no. Use your state money for Obamacare subsidies. That way we know you're not giving it to illegals. That's the debate. Now, Republicans ain't got enough sense to explain it. Just that simple. We want the states to use your state money to fulfill the Obamacare subsidies. We're doing that because we found out that if the federal government is giving you money for Obamacare subsidies, you're going to use your state money for illegals and bring them up to your state and to your sanctuary cities. No. We're going to cut down on federal money for Obamacare subsidies, so you have to use your state money. And that way you won't be giving that money to these illegals. And the Democrats are going to have shut the government down because they know they have to get these illegals up to their states and up to their sanctuary cities so they can control the Congress and so they can control the presidency. Boy, these jokers are dirty. You know what, man? You got 14 states in Washington, D.C. that are involved in these shenanigans. All of them blue states. All of them. They're not caring about their American citizens. They are caring about illegals. And you know what? You Democrats ought to be ashamed of yourself. You people out there vote for these people. Do you know what they've done? They've basically allowed a foreign army to come into this nation. And they are preparing themselves for a civil war. They have opened the floodgates up to a foreign army, an invasion, that they are going to activate at will. And this is why Donald Trump is sending in the National Guard. Trump sent in the National Guard because they told these illegals to come up here. And the federal government has said, hey, man, why don't you, if you arrest these illegals, or if you have your police out, if you see one, call us, we'll come get them. They said, nah. We're not just going to not get them for you. We're going to give them sanctuary. We're going to give them food. We're going to give them clothing. We're going to give them shelter. It's like you housing an army to activate. And so Donald Trump is saying, I'm coming in these cities. Now, since you won't cooperate in sending them out, I'm going to come in and get them. And so you got jokers like Pritzker and Gavin Newsom and Kathy Hochul who are going to court to keep the federal government out and keep the troops out. Now, why would they do that? They like tyranny. They want to protect their army. You have these people that hate America so much and they hate the who they call the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, and Christians, conservative Christians so much, they are bringing in, they are bringing in an army. It's almost like when Adolf Hitler was raising all that hell in Germany, and he had taken over all of these countries, and Great Britain needed help. And then they made a mistake and they bombed Pearl Harbor, and America said, we're on our way. And America went over into Great Britain, and then we invaded Europe on D-Day. Kicked Hitler's behind, made Europe okay again. They're trying to do the same thing here. They have invited another army into the United States of America to invade, the same way we invaded Europe. Yeah, same way we invaded Europe June 6th. They're invading America right now. Those No King's Day marches and all this kind of stuff, all this Antifa stuff, all this burning stuff. Understand who you're dealing with. Understand this is an evil organization. Understand that there is a method to the madness, that none of this is happening in a vacuum. And understand that when these illegals and all of these Marxists start killing, they ain't gonna just stop with white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. Understand that if they start this, Americans are gonna finish it. And you better understand also that in rooms, boardrooms, in very, very high places that you people are not privy to, but I am, we see it coming. And don't think we're not prepared for it. We see what these Democrats are doing. We see what these evil leftists are doing. We know this is a plan, and we're prepared for it. So right now, this government shutdown is happening because we're trying to tell these illegal aliens, you don't need to come to America. You need to stay out. All of these things that these Democrats and these liberals are giving you to come here to this country to raise hell and cause mayhem and maybe pick up arms and go against the American people, you need to stay out. This is a warning. We hope you listen. But I'm here to tell y'all something. No matter what they do, no matter what they try to do, no matter how hard they come at us, we're going to be victorious. They can't defeat us. You know why? Because we have right on our side. We have God on our side. We have 250 years of American ingenuity and stick-to-itiveness and righteous violence, if we need it, on our side. And when they try, you don't have men in dresses and high heels and lipstick who don't want to mess up their little nails on this side. We're prepared for it. We're prepared for everything that they bring. And they're going to wish they never even tried it in the United States of America. So I'm going to keep bringing this stuff to you. I'm going to keep you awake. God, I am here to wake you up. Hope I did you some good here today. So join me again for another edition of the Vince Everett Ellison Show. All right, friends, Vince Everett Ellison is here. I want you to go to my website. And on my website, you're going to see a lot of great stuff, man. You're going to see that we got T-shirts. We got caps. You got my books, my documentaries. You got all kinds of stuff on VinceSpeaksTruth.com. Go there. We're dropping new T-shirts. We're dropping new merchandise. My new book, The End of Tolerance, is there. The End of Tolerance. Make sure you get it. Make it number one. If you got my first three, get The End of Tolerance. It's just as good.
On the bright afternoon of Sunday, June 25th, 1876, Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer and his 7th Cavalry overlooked one of the largest largest Indian camps in history, from the bluffs on the opposing side of the Little Bighorn River. Custer and his men had marched nearly 100 miles in pursuit of Sitting Bull, the leader of the camp. Custer's objective was to force Sitting Bull and his allied Lakota, Northern Cheyenne, and Arapaho tribes back to the Great Sioux Reservation. However, Sitting Bull had not signed any treaty and wanted his people to continue their nomadic lifestyle, and thus was prepared to fight the Americans to defend it. Custer divided his 7th Cavalry into 4 groups: 3 companies commanded by Captain Frederick Benteen, 3 more companies commanded by Major Marcus A. Reno, 5 companies commanded by Custer, and the remainder with the pack train of ammunition and supplies. This battle between the burgeoning power of the United States and the last holdouts of the Plains Indians would shape the future of the American West for centuries to come. On April 29, 1868, the United States and parts of the Sioux Nation signed the Second Treaty of Fort Laramie, establishing the borders of the Great Sioux Reservation. The treaty stipulated that the Indians would not attack American railroads or settlers, and instead would rely on government subsidies for survival. The United States government, focused on expanding its influence westward, wanted the Indians to adopt a more American lifestyle and live permanently in reservations. However, some tribes of the Sioux did not sign this treaty, and thus did not feel obligated to comply with its terms. The leader of these non-treaty Indians, Sitting Bull, did not sign the treaty and was strongly opposed to living on a reservation. In 1874, the U.S. Army sent George Custer on an expedition into the Black Hills in search of a good position for an American fort, and also in an attempt to discover rumored gold in the Black Hills. A small amount of gold was discovered, which led to an influx of American settlers in the region. The expedition was in complete violation of the Treaty of Fort Laramie and led to additional tensions with the Sioux. In 1875, the United States government ordered all non-reservation Indians to return to the reservation by January 31st, 1876, or face military action from the United States. By January 31st, the non-treaty Indians had not come back to the reservation, so America geared up for battle. Throughout the spring of 1876, the U.S. Army devised a plan to force the non-treaty Indians onto the Great Sioux Reservation. This plan would consist of General George Crook marching up from Fort Fetterman in the Wyoming Territory with 1,000 men. Colonel John Gibbon would move east from Fort Ellis along the Yellowstone River with 450 men, and General Alfred Terry would march west from Fort Lincoln in the Dakota Territory with 879 men, largely made up of the 7th Cavalry under command of Lieutenant Colonel George Custer. It was expected that any of these 3 forces could easily handle Sitting Bull and his estimated 800 to 1,500 warriors if they encountered them. Furthermore, it was expected that if one of these groups found the camp without the other 2, they would still attack it, as the Indians were infinitely more mobile than the Americans, and their movement patterns were extremely unpredictable. On June 4th, a Sundance ceremony was held in the Deer Medicine Rocks. Sitting Bull received a vision of United States soldiers falling into his camp, and a great victory over the Bluecoats was prophesied. On June 10th, Major Marcus A. Reno and 6 companies of the 7th Cavalry were detached on a 10-day reconnaissance of the area between the Powder River and Tongue River to help locate Sitting Bull's camp. On June 17th, Crook's column was attacked around 10 a.m. by Lakota and Cheyenne, led by Crazy Horse along the Rosebud River. The Battle of the Rosebud would result in a slight Lakota victory and would force General Crook to retreat and wait for reinforcements. That same day, Major Reno returned from his scouting mission and had reported to General Terry that he discovered abandoned Lakota villages up the Rosebud Valley. So, on June 22nd, Custer was detached with 12 companies of the 7th Cavalry with orders to march up the Rosebud Creek in pursuit of Crazy Horse. Custer and his men were expected to attack the Indian camp, which would cause the Indians to flee towards Terry and Gibbon's now united force. trapping the Lakota and forcing a surrender. On the morning of June 25th, Custer's scouts had finally spotted the village. They estimated that there were around 8,000 inhabitants, with a fighting force between 1,500 and 2,000 warriors. Custer initially planned to make a surprise attack the morning of the 26th. But his scouts alerted him that Custer's presence had been detected by the Lakota. Given all of this information, Custer decided that he must attack immediately, as he feared that the Lakota would be able to flee from any American army and remain off the reservation. The Indian camp was based on a flat plain at the center of the Little Bighorn River. On the eastern side of the river were steep, uneven bluffs. The Americans formed a two-pronged attack, with Major Marcus A. Reno attacking the south of the Indian camp, and Custer moving along the bluffs to attack the northern side of the camp. Captain Frederick Benteen would be in reserve to support either prongs of the attack. Major Marcus A. Reno crossed the Little Bighorn at around 3 p.m. and charged towards the village. Reno was unaware of the size or capability of the village, as his sight of the village was obscured by trees at a bend in the Little Bighorn River. Once Reno had passed this bend, he realized the full size of the village and suspected a trap. Reno rode forward and ordered his troops to dismount and form a skirmish line and fire into the village, indiscriminately hitting civilians and soldiers alike. After 20 minutes of firing, Reno had only taken one casualty, but an Indian force had formed in a protected area and launched an attack primarily on the left of Reno's line, forcing Reno's detachment to retreat back to a forested bend in the Little Bighorn River. However, the Indian barrage continued, and Reno's scout, Bloody Knife, was shot in the head, splattering his brains into Reno's face. Reno, understandably, was deeply shaken by this, and ordered his men to mount, dismount, and mount again. He then said, "All those who want to make their escape, follow me," and led an extremely disorderly retreat across the river, condemning his wounded to their death. During this retreat, many men were picked off as Indians fired at them while they crossed the river. Reno and his remaining men scurried up the 8-foot-tall bluffs and made it to a defensible position. Moments later, Benteen joined up with Reno and his now extremely shaken men. Benteen had been on a scouting mission when he received a message from Custer telling him, "Benteen, come on, big village, be quick, bring packs, P.S. bring packs." Benteen had no idea what this meant, but inferred that Custer was in battle. However, Reno would not move his forces until the packs arrived, as the baggage train was lagging behind Benteen. Reno, being the superior officer of the sector, had the power to overrule Benteen, who wanted to give aid to Custer as quickly as possible. The Indians who were previously fighting the remainder of Reno's men moved downstream towards Custer's detachment. It was around this time that firing from downstream was heard from the soldiers on Reno Hill, making it clear to the soldiers that Custer had been engaged somewhere downriver, but it was unclear where. Reno decided not to concern himself with the defense on the hill and instead went down the bluff to locate the body of one of his subordinates. While Reno descended the bluff, Benteen organized a defense on the hill. Captain Thomas Weir, disheartened by both of his commanders' lack of urgency, disobeyed orders and led his D Company out onto the bluffs to assist Custer. This inspired other soldiers on the hill and eventually Benteen to ride out after Weir. Captain Weir reached the northern point of the bluffs and could see a smoky battle about 4 miles away. Warriors can be seen firing at objects on the ground. The Americans at this point think that Custer had been driven off by the Indians. The Indians, now done with the northern battle, drifted back towards Weir and Benteen and began skirmishing with them along the bluff. Benteen withdrew his extended forces and made it back to Reno Hill, only losing one man. The force on Reno Hill would defend themselves from Indian fire until sundown. The next day, the Indians returned and tried to push their advantage from the southern end of the hill. But with the high ground and 300 men, Reno and Benteen were able to defend the hill, receiving few casualties. The Indian camp packed up and moved further down the valley after an unsuccessful assault on Reno Hill, marking the end of the Battle of Little Bighorn. What happened to Custer's detachment is largely conjecture, as much of the information is based off secondhand sources and is highly debated to this day. Custer, during Reno's battle, was moving up the bluffs along the northern side of the Little Bighorn River. He saw Reno effectively holding off the Indians at the first part of Reno's battle, and continued to move north in an attempt to capture non-combatants in order to have a bargaining chip against the Indians. From here, Custer sends 3 companies under Captain Miles Keogh to Loose Ridge to act as a marker for Benteen's arriving troops. Custer would move with Captain George Yates down Medicine Tail Coulee towards the Little Bighorn River. When they arrived, Custer noticed that the village was completely deserted, except for small amounts of Indian warriors. Company L, under James Calhoun, fired at the Indian warriors guarding the camp by the river. Due to this, Custer decided not to cross the river and instead to reunite with Captain Keogh and move north to capture non-combatants. Custer would again keep Captain Keogh atop Calhoun Hill, while Custer and Captain Yates, along with their troops, would try to locate a place to cross the river and capture the non-combatants. While Custer moved towards the Little Bighorn, the group of Indians who had fought against Reno crossed the river and approached the troops left on top of Calhoun Hill. When Custer moved towards the Little Bighorn, he could see thousands of non-combatants fleeing the village. There were far too many to try and capture them with the small force he had, so he decided to move his forces up to Cemetery Ridge and wait for Benteen to arrive. Once Benteen would arrive, Custer would have enough men to capture the majority of the non-combatants. However, as large numbers of Indian warriors crept up Calhoun Coulee, Keogh sent Company C out of the reserve into Calhoun Coulee to defend his right flank. However, Company C's position broke the range of Keogh's warriors. The Indians then formed a counterattack to Company C's skirmish line and pressed their attack. With no assistance from Captain Keogh's troops, Company C was forced to flee on foot to Calhoun Ridge. However, the attack smashed Company C and wiped out over half of their forces. James Calhoun decided to shift his skirmish line to the west to help the remainder of Company C. However, this new skirmish line did not defend against the Indians' position to the south. These warriors moved up and fired on the skirmish line. At the same time, the Indians coming from the west pushed up on the American line, forcing its collapse. The Americans were unable to reform their line. Company E on Cemetery Ridge was attacked by a group of Cheyenne warriors, which slashed Company E's skirmish line in half. By this point, Captain Keogh and his remaining forces were now surrounded on 3 sides. Many notable warriors, including Crazy Horse, now collapsed on the remaining American forces, plunging them into chaos. The few remaining American soldiers attempted to flee across Battle Ridge, but were continuously chipped away. Custer, by this point, could see that something big was going on across Battle Ridge, and Custer moved his men up to Last Stand Hill. Custer formed his men up into 2 lines. As the remainder of Keogh's men tried to reach Last Stand Hill, they were completely cut down. The Indian warriors now surrounded Custer and his forces, and as there was little cover on the hill, Custer was forced to shoot down his horses for cover. With Custer's remaining horses, he sent riders off the hill to try and drive away massing Indian warriors, and they would then return to the hill. However, these riders were converged on and were killed. At this point, Custer and his men were completely alone on top of Last Stand Hill. With no means of escape, they were thinned out first with gun and arrow fire, and then were overwhelmed by Indians attacking with axes and clubs. By 5:50 p.m., the battle was completely over. In total, Custer's detachment lost all 210 men with it, and the entire American force at the Battle of the Little Bighorn lost 268 men. Unsuspectedly, the Indians only lost approximately 50 warriors, marking a shockingly unsuspected defeat of the American force. The surviving force under Major Reno was unaware of what had happened to Custer by the end of June 26th. On June 27th, the combined force of Terry and Gibbon arrived on the battlefield. They informed Reno's men of what had happened to Custer and his forces. The surviving soldiers were genuinely shocked that Custer was defeated, as they never for a second thought that it was possible for them to lose to an Indian force. Although Sitting Bull and his forces stunned the Americans, the victory ended up costing them dearly. Custer's death served as a rallying point against the Indians, and within a year, the majority of the warriors from the Battle of the Little Bighorn had surrendered and were confined to reservations. Sitting Bull would end up escaping to Canada, where he would remain in exile for a few years. Crazy Horse surrendered on May 6, 1877, and was confined to Pine Ridge Reservation. After a rumor got out that Crazy Horse was attempting to escape the reservation, American soldiers attempted to arrest him, and in a struggle, Crazy Horse was stabbed and died. Indian resistance would continue against America until the Wounded Knee Massacre in 1890.